and we'll be happy to put you to work. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Lars Demander, an 8th generation member of the family to own and run the historic Clover Nook Farm. A little bit about his background that relates to me. His grandfather was my first grade bus driver, Monk Woodward. So I don't know how many of you had Monk as a bus driver, but I'm sure pretty many. His father, Rex Demander, was one of my students when he came to class. Some things don't change. So without further ado, Lars, who is by far the producer of the tastiest corn on the cob in Bethany and probably the whole state. Lars.
Thank you all for coming tonight. It means a lot to have such a great turnout. Really shows the support that our farm has in the community. And again, a special thank you to Linda and Will and the Historical Society for helping coordinate and put this event together. So I originally wrote the history of the farm back while I was in college. I was taking an agricultural history class, and there was an opportunity for an extra credit paper, and I decided to write the paper on the history of my family farm. Later I converted this to a presentation that I did actually back in 2015 for the farm's 250th year of operation. So it's been some time. A lot's happened since 2015 when I was adding on to the history for this. But I'm excited to share the 260-year history of the farm. There's obviously a lot of content to cover, so it may move kind of quickly, but I tried to shoot the presentation between 50 and 60 minutes, but 260 years is kind of hard to fit into that time. And hopefully there's some time afterwards to take some comments and questions. So Clover Nook Farm is located on a hilltop in the center of the town of Bethany. Originally established in 1765, however, the land that it resides on was originally used for agricultural purposes prior to this. Over the many years of operation, the farm has changed and had to adapt to the times in order to continue to be viable. Many of the generations at Clover Nook held significant political, agricultural, and other community leadership positions during their time. You'll also notice as I go through the history that the family name has changed several times over the course of its history, but sometimes the daughter was the one to inherit the farm. So, we get started in the mid-1700s. I don't have any pictures from that time period, so I just put in some nice photos I took over the course of the last 10 years. So the land that Clover Nook resides on was originally purchased by Francis Friend from local Native Americans as part of the two-bit purchase, and it was designated to be used as summer pasture in 1661. Long before the town of Bethany was established, the land resided in what was known as the Derby-Milford area. The land continued to be used by Francis's son, Francis Jr., and his son, Israel French, as summer pasture. Israel had one son, David French, who would be my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. He married Hannah Lyons from the Bethany area in 1765. That same year, David and Hannah decided to settle on the land now known as Clover Nook Farm and built the first homestead, which was a log cabin, and this is approximately where the original homestead was. There's nothing left of it or any evidence that it was ever there. This is just what I've been told from previous generations. David began living and farming on the land in 1765. That's the year we say that the farm officially started, is when they started living on the land. Not too long after this, the Revolutionary War began, in which David served defending the city of Boston. One interesting story from this time, while David was home from the war for a brief period of time, riding on horseback in New Haven, a cannonball shot and fired overhead and landed a distance away from him. So he decided to get off his horse and bring the cannonball home as a little souvenir. The cannonball actually stayed on the farm for many years until later Charlotte Woodward, who was the fourth generation on the farm, donated it to the Seymour Public Library. However, years after that, the area was hit by a hurricane. The Seymour Library was washed into the river, and we've never seen the cannonball since. At the conclusion of the war, David returned home to work the land for the rest of his life. He also served on the state's first General Assembly for over 20 years, and he also was a trial justice and a deacon of the Congregational Church. David had 12 children, the youngest of whom was Harry French, who would be my great times 4 grandfather. Harry and his wife Harriet were the next generation to take over the farm. During the time they were working the land, Harry and his father David, they decided to name it Clover Nook Farm. Now, to be honest, somewhere along the line, we don't really know why they named it this, but we've always assumed that it was due to the abundance of clover that grows on the farm and continues to this day. A little side note, growing up and still to this day, I've always had a knack for finding 4-leaf clovers all the time on the farm, and have even found 2 or 3 5-leaf clovers. The odds of finding a 4-leaf clover, fun fact, is 1 in 10,000, while finding a 5-leaf clover is 1 in 20 million. So sometimes I wonder if this luck's transferable to the Powerball. So Harry built another homestead in 1825, and this old photo should probably look somewhat familiar to some of you, as it's the farmhouse that's still on the property, and my parents still reside in. The homestead has been maintained and gone under many renovations over the years to stay up to date. Like David and Hannah French, Harry and Harriet at this time, and many people in the United States at that time, practiced subsistence farming. That is, they farmed to feed their family and themselves, and if they were lucky enough to have any extra, they could bring it to market. In 1832, the town of Bethany was officially established by the state legislature, and Harry actually served as the first selectman of Bethany from 1835 to 1841, and then moved on to be a representative in the state legislature. Harry and Harriet have one daughter, Jane, would be my great times 3 grandmother. Jane was a school teacher in the neighboring town of Cheshire, where she met her future husband, Justice Peck. Early on in their marriage, Justice was running a commercial boat on the Farmington Canal, and the couple did have a son who unfortunately tragically drowned in the river when he was only 2 years old in 1842. Jane's father also passed away soon after this in 1843. It's at this time that Justice and Jane decided to move back to the homestead and continue running the family farm. This should be another familiar photo for all you folks that have been in Bethany for a good time. The barn known as the Horse Barn was built in 1840, and it was used by my parents as the roadside farm stand up to 2016, and it was destroyed in 2018 by the infamous tornado that came through that year, which we'll get to that point eventually. Originally, as the name implies, it was used to house horses and supplies for the horses as well as other farming equipment. Justice Peck was involved in many of the town's affairs, becoming involved in local politics, as well as founding several different societies, one of which was the Woodbridge Bethany Agricultural Society, which no longer exists today. The society held an annual agricultural fair, and the fair alternated where it was held. We know that it was held at Clover Nook Farm in 1862 from this flyer, as well as in 1868. We know the field that it was held in was this field here in relation to the farm. And interestingly enough, we still call this field the fair lot, even though it's been almost 150 years since the fair was held in it. Some of the events at the fair were traditional livestock and produce competitions, horse trotting, as well as some unique categories that you don't really see at fairs anymore, such as best wood stove, rugs, and musical instruments. In 1868, we know Justice won Best Family Horse and Best Matched Pair of Horses, which is the photo here, is the Best Family Horse. Justice and Jane had 3 children while living on the farm, Harry, Marietta, and Charlotte Peck. And Charlotte Peck was the next one to carry on the farm. She would be my great-great-grandmother. She married Samuel Woodward, who was a school teacher from Watertown, Connecticut in 1872. And together they became the 4th generation of family to run the farm. Samuel spent the majority of his life running the farm in the summer months and teaching school in Bethany during the winter. He served as 2nd selectman for 4 years in 1877, after which he served as 1st selectman for 21 consecutive years until 1902, and went on to represent Bethany in the state legislature. During this time, at the turn of the century, the farm was rather diversified and getting away from subsistence farming, producing apples, peaches, vegetables, sheep, eggs, and butter were the staple products. This was a time in the United States when people started to move away from the farm as we were going through the Industrial Revolution, and people didn't have to farm themselves to feed themselves. Eggs became a major source of income for the farm. 2 coops were constructed behind the farmhouse to bolster that side of the business. This is one of them, and this is the second, which is actually a 2-story chicken coop. During their time on the farm, Samuel and Charlotte did extensive renovations to the homestead to modernize it, converting the once summer kitchen to a year-round kitchen by adding a 2nd floor above it. And they turned the old winter kitchen into what is today we use as a dining room. They also added the veranda that wraps around the front of the house that's still on it today. And a 2nd house was constructed behind the farmhouse it's a very similar style, and it was used as a wash house and additional living quarters for hired men. And the building was actually relocated in 1920 by placing it on logs and pulling it with horses to where it's located today. Some may recognize this little house when you're driving to the farm from that end of the road. And it's currently a separate residence that my Aunt Linda uses. Samuel and Charlotte had 3 children, Florence, Daisy, and Sherman, who I'll refer to as Sherman Sr. Sherman Sr., my great-grandfather, attended the Connecticut State Agricultural College in Storrs, now known as UConn. But however, during his last semester there, he and some of his friends decided to pull a prank by tying a pig to the church bell on campus, and resulted in him being expelled in his last semester. So he was not the first member of the family to graduate college. technically. This is a picture of Sherman Sr. in 1936 when he won an award for the county's best crop of alfalfa. A lot of these old awards you don't hear of anymore. He first married Rachel Carrington of Bethany, Carrington being another big Bethany name. However, sadly, Rachel passed away when she was very young during childbirth. Sherman later married Margaret Twing and returned to the family farm. With his college education, even though he didn't have the piece of paper to prove it, Sherman was able to quickly make many improvements, innovate, and modernize the farm. He expanded and improved all aspects: vegetables, fruit, poultry, and the dairy operation. Another old photo that should be familiar to a barn that still stands today. This was built in 1920, and it was one of the first large dairy barns in the state, considered state-of-the-art at the time. Today, the main section is used primarily for hay and supply storage. However, we always refer to it as the cow barn, even though this isn't the barn that the cows have access to. He also substantially increased the poultry operation by adding an additional 2-story coop, which was attached to the dairy barn in the back. At the peak of his poultry production, Sherman had about 2,500 laying hens. And to be honest, it'd be nice to have that many layers today with the price of eggs. He delivered his milk and eggs twice a week to Naugatuck and New Haven were the primary markets. In the early 1900s, people started to drink more milk as a beverage rather than just shelf-stable forms such as butter, cream, and cheese. To match this increased demand for fluid milk, he built a milk house that once sat in front of the old dairy barn. It's pictured behind this hired hand on the horse. The ice house was insulated with thick layers of sawdust, and then large ice blocks were actually harvested during the winter months and put in here, and then further insulated, and then that would keep the ice house cool actually well into the summer months. It was also during this time that the roads in Bethany were being named. So the farm today resides on Fairwood Road, which the fair portion comes from the fair that was once held on the property, and wood comes from the family name operating the farm at the time, hence Fairwood. The first electric milk machine was installed around 1930. It was an Empire milk machine based out of Westchester, Pennsylvania. Soon after adopting the new technology, Sherman Sr. became a local dealer for the company. Additional improvements to the dairy included the first automated barn cleaner in 1950, and in 1951, that 2-story chicken coop. Eggs must have not really been much viable anymore as the focus switched to dairy. That 2-story coop was reduced to 1-story to house additional cows. During this period, the farm was one of the first large dairies in the state, having around 80 cows, which in perspective today, an 80-cow dairy farming milk as a commodity wouldn't exist. Dairies of that size today pretty much have to make some kind of value-added product. Sherman Sr. was always keeping up to date with the latest improvements in technology. In 1930, Case came out with its Model L on the market, which Sherman bought in that very same year. It was the first tractor to be used on the farm, and not shortly after adopting this new technology, the draft horses were sent down the road. He also purchased the farm's first mechanical hay baler, a New Holland 77, and Sherman's interest in new technologies extended beyond just farming equipment, as he was the first person in Bethany with a television set. During his lifetime, Sherman Sr. and his wife Margaret were very involved with the Bethany Library Association as they were charter members. Sherman Sr. and Margaret had 3 children, Helen, Marion, and Sherman Jr., or as most people knew him by, his Monk, and he was my grandfather. So a story that kind of goes along with my Grandpa Monk and Sherman Sr.'s interest in the library was when what's today the Clark Memorial Library was laying the first cornerstone of its construction. My Grandpa Monk was a young boy and had been out playing all morning long. When it came time to go to the event, there wasn't enough time for my grandfather to get cleaned up, so his mother told him to stay in the car so no one would see him all dirty and filthy. But if you knew my Grandpa Monk, he was a bit of a character and a troublemaker, you might say. So this started early on in his life, and sure enough, he snuck out of the car and got himself landed on the front page of the newspaper. Another story I always heard about my grandfather as a kid was about at the time their family pony named Bobby. My grandfather had to use Bobby to cart firewood and do other chores. However, he would usually end up getting sidetracked playing games and whatnot. It said that the pony had the patience of a saint because he'd often be found waiting by the door, waiting for my grandfather to finish his chores. The farm was divided among Sherman Sr.'s 3 children, Helen, Marion, and Sherman Jr., each of which played their own role at Clover Nook. After completing college, Helen did the books for the farm and delivered milk and eggs from 1940 to 1945, and at that time she married Howard Bassett and moved to live at his farm in Beacon Falls, which many people might know as Bassett's farm. Sherman Jr., my Grandpa Monk, married Barbara Dawn in 1953 and took over the dairy operation in 1962. Marion married Dudley Sandell in 1946, who Dudley later became partners with my Grandpa Monk in 1967. Marion was a very active leader of 4-H for over 20 years. She received state alumni awards and also served on the National 4-H Council. She also rallied her local 4-H group and started the first annual Memorial Day Parade here in town. Dudley Sandell, who's perhaps one of the unsung heroes of Clover Nook, was a World War II veteran serving in the Air Corps, or now is the Air Force. He was a carpenter by trade, responsible for many improvements of the farmhouse and the barns. He served as Bethany's building inspector for many years, and later in life helped formulate a plan in Marion for the farm's future and transitioning it to my parents. In retirement, Dudley was actually the only one who co-signed a loan with my dad during a critical transition time for the farm, helping finance the purchase of essential equipment to keep Clover Nook going. It was during this time period of about 1950 to 1970 that dairy farms were really struggling to become even larger in the state. Post-war, suburban expansion led to widespread farm closures in Connecticut. As land values soared, many farmers sold to developers. It was very much a get big or get out time of farming in Connecticut, particularly in dairy, which was once the backbone of Connecticut agriculture. The industry began consolidating due to higher production costs, lower milk prices, and increased federal regulations. Many farms had to change their focus away from traditional dairy or row crop farming and get into more specialty farming or face going out of business. Clover Nook was not spared during this difficult time for Connecticut agriculture, as a number of parcels of land were sold off during this dramatic shift in order to keep the farm going. Sherman Jr. also drove school bus for many years. As Linda mentioned, she was one of her riders. Many farmers during this time drove school bus because it it was during the winter, a time of year when we weren't growing crops, so it kind of made sense as a way to generate some off-farm income. People to this day, again, like Linda said, will reminisce with me riding Monk's bus, which I don't really know anyone else who remembers their bus driver as a kid, but he must have left a lasting impression on me. So the dairy herd at Clover Nook was sold in 1972. It's kind of interesting to see over the short period of 50 years of once becoming the state-of-the-art dairy in the state, 50 years later, dairy was no longer viable. My grandpa Monk, after the dairy herd was sold, continued to raise cows, beef cows, and replacement heifers, sweet corn, and hay. Sherman Jr. and Barbara had 4 children, Linda, Russell, Deborah, and Sherman III, or as many people knew him as Skipper. So, Deborah and Eric, or many know them as Rex, or my parents, were high school sweethearts and graduated Amity in 1980 and married in 1987. In 1988, as Sherman Jr. Ready for retirement, the future of the farm was quite uncertain, as no one had stepped up at that point to try to continue operating it. The farm was nearly sold in its entirety and developed to be a golf course. My parents, Debbie and Rex, decided to move back to the farm after my older brother Carl was born. And while dating my mom and through high school and up to getting married, my dad had helped on the farm part-time while also working in the trades as a sheet metal worker. In 1991, the year I was born, my dad decided to take on farming full-time and leave his steady job in the trades. Ultimately, my parents did not want to see the family farm be sold off and developed. They wanted to be able to work and raise their boys at the same time. During the 1990s, the farms that were left in Connecticut after decades of rapidly losing farms, the farms that were left switched to nursery, specialty crops, and most of them with a focus on retail sales, away from traditional agricultural commodities. Early on running the farm, my dad grew sweet corn, pumpkins, tomatoes, and hay. He also raised chickens, pigs, and continued raising cows on the farm. My mom managed the books and the roadside stand. Transitioning the farm to focus on fresh produce and building a retail business on a back road in a small town like Bethany, before the internet made marketing easier, was no simple task for my parents. It was many years of struggle and uncertainty. To help support the family and secure health insurance coverage, my mom also worked part-time at night off the farm while they established the farm business. As kids, my brother Carl and I would compete in local fairs in events such as tallest sunflowers, like in this photo, and giant pumpkins and other events. Pumpkins really became a significant revenue source for the farm, and my mom, believing, since we were pumpkin farmers, she thought we ought to have the largest jack-o'-lantern display in town, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with. This tradition started in 1993 in this photo, and this is a more recent one, so the tradition is continued to this day, even though the Halloween holiday really isn't what it used to be, we still do this. So my parents had the insight to see the whole local food movement and shift in Connecticut agriculture towards specialty crops and retail sales early on. They continued to diversify and expand the fresh produce offered and sold it all through the seasonal roadside farm stand out of the old 1840 horse barn. 2 greenhouses were built and additional equipment for growing vegetables was acquired over the years. In 2000, Clover Nook Farm was recognized with the Connecticut Century Farm Award. Nominations for this award were farms that have been in the same family for over 100 years and are expected to continue as such. We received a bronze plaque for this award, which is now on display in the farm store, and a citation from Governor John Rowland. In 2013, the horse barn, the dairy barn, and the homestead were approved by the state as historical buildings, and Clover Nook was then listed on the state's historical site registry. Each year, we expanded our offerings by adding new varieties and types of produce. The growing local food movement continued to gain momentum, increasing support for small farms like ours. And at this time, the farms that had survived the rapid decline and purge of Connecticut agriculture decades earlier started to see somewhat of a resurgence. At this point, Clover Nook Farm has maintained 90 acres total, with about 60 acres actively in production, with the remaining consisting mostly of wetlands and woodland. By far, over the years, our cornerstone product has always been and still is sweet corn. A lot of people ask, what's the secret? They think we have special seed or some kind of proprietary activity. Someone once asked if we inject it with sugar to make it sweet. We don't do any of that. Instead, the key is quite simple. It's picked fresh every day, and if it doesn't sell that day, we won't sell it. And the other key is if it gets over mature and starts to lose its ripeness and sweetness, we'll walk by it and go to a younger crop, which is a hard thing to do for some farmers, leaving product in the field like that, but we don't want to compromise on the quality. So growing up, I always knew I wanted to come back home to the farm. I think my mom dug out a time capsule when I was in first grade, and one of the questions was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was a farmer. I helped out with chores and learned as I grew up, and after graduating Amity, I ended up getting accepted and enrolling at Cornell University in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. While at Cornell, my major was agricultural science and a minor in agribusiness management. And while I was at Cornell, I met Amanda, who was an animal science major. We started dating our sophomore year of college and graduated together in 2014. Spoiler alert, skipping ahead to 2020, Amanda and I got married. But right after Cornell, we both went on to graduate school at UConn, where I finished my master's in agricultural economics in 2015, while Amanda graduated with both her master's and PhD in animal science in 2017. In 2016 is when I returned to the farm and became partners with my dad in the operating business. It was at this time that we needed a way to quickly expand the business to be able to support both my parents and myself. We decided the direction to go was a new retail store to provide a better atmosphere, cleaner space, keeping it modern yet rustic, and designing it for retail in mind. Unlike the old horse barn, it was designed for horses and not retail. This was designed for retail, and also provided additional shelf space and the ability to expand in the future. Part of this was I applied for and was awarded the Farm Reinvestment Grant through the Connecticut Department of Agriculture. And while this helped fund the project partially, the majority of the new project required taking on significant debt, which was a first for my parents. We literally bet the farm on this project. It was a major leap of faith in the future of Clover Nook. Fortunately, it was met with great success and embraced by the community. We saw sales increase and our customer base grow. At this point in time, the farm was still seasonal, and only selling our own produce or Connecticut-grown produce. One of the major challenges of being a seasonal business was we had seasonal part-time employees, which posed a problem because year after year you don't know who's going to come back and who's not. We continue to expand and improve, growing on the farm, trying new products, seeing what works, what doesn't, and refining what we produce. Some of the things we added were value-added products, mainly using our tomatoes, such as sauce, salsa, and crushed tomatoes is the most recent. And then a fun little side crop that I started were the kiwi berries, if anybody's had them. They're a pretty niche crop, but they're basically like a great version of a kiwi fruit where you eat the whole thing. So far, we've been successful with them and people enjoy them. 2018 started off well with me being recognized as Connecticut's Outstanding Young Farmer of the Year, as recognition of the successful growth and implementation of grant dollars and expansion of our family farm. However, a short 2 months after this, May 15th, 2018 rolled around, which for those of you that were in town at the time, remember this date, was the day that the EF1 tornado came through Bethany. My parents and I were in the greenhouse, just closing it up, battening down the hatches, because we thought it was just going to be a thunderstorm rolling through, standard procedure to get ready for. However, once it hit, it was like all hell breaking loose while we were out in it. My parents nearly ran to the old horse barn to seek shelter, but thank God they didn't, because this is how it ended up. I remember running across the road and into the side house yard and just seeing behind me the horse barn come toppling down all the way across the road and nearly to the house. Luckily, we've got a great community supporting the farm. We were able to recover. People reached out and helped in any way that they could. One of whom was a fellow Bethany farmer, Bobby Carrington, who runs a logging business, came by with his logging truck in this picture. And since the old horse barn was being used as equipment storage for us, he was able to gently pull off the rubble off of our equipment so we could salvage it and continue to use it without damaging it. We had no power for a week during this time. So overall, after the tornado, it was a year of recovery. We lost our second greenhouse, fence lines had trees on them, trees on top of crops, trees pretty much in every field. The chimney on the farmhouse blew off, and there was roof damage to pretty much every structure. Luckily though, we had the new farm store, which the only damage sustained there was the garage door blew in. So luckily we were able to continue operating retail sales that year. And as a way to commemorate the old horse barn, we were able to salvage the original weather vane after the tornado, and we kept it and saved it along with some salvaged barnwood. And actually, Doug Ford, our carpenter, is here tonight. He built this shadow box, and now we have it hanging up above the horn bench as a memory of the old horse barn and the weather vane that sat on top of it. The silver lining to this all was at the end of 2018, since the old barn was primarily used for equipment storage, we were able to use the insurance money from that and build our new equipment pole barn. We hired an Amish company out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and they built this 80 by 48 foot pole barn in 3 days. "2020 rolled around. I'm sure everyone remembers that year. It was also a monumental year for our farm for a number of reasons. I remember it was only 5 years ago, but up to this point, we were still seasonal business, only open during May to October. COVID hit in March, and at that point, people were reaching out to us wanting anything we had because they knew we had frozen meat as well well as some jar goods that we store over the winter. So I quickly rallied and set up an online ordering system with curbside pickup. And then one thing led to another. People wanted fresh produce, even though it was March and April and there is none locally. They wanted fresh produce, dairy, and every other product they could get without having to go to the grocery store. So we made the leap and started carrying even more products, produce that was not locally grown, but continued to focus on quality as one of our main goals. This is the point where we started to transition, become a one-stop shop, which was a long-term goal, but COVID kind of accelerated this. Going into winter that year, with COVID making its resurgence, people didn't want us to close. So we stayed open again with curbside pickup with limited hours, but this was the beginning of our year-round operating. Again, 2020 was a monumental year for us, but since the last time I did this history talk in 2015, my grandpa Monk passed away in 2016 at the age of 87. In 2020, the last remaining 3 members of the 6th generation also passed away. My grandma Barbara at 93 years old, my great aunt Marion, 97 years old, and my great aunt Helen was 100 years old. '20 did end on a high note, however. Amanda and I decided to follow through with our wedding and get married that year and not postpone because of COVID. We got married in September of that year, which was right in between when COVID started making its comeback. And this is a good moment to recognize the important role Amanda has played in the farm's recent history as someone who married into the family. While not actively involved in day-to-day operations, she's been my partner in many ways, always there to discuss challenges, problem solve, provide support, and shape ideas for the farm's future. Much of the farm's recent progress that I often get all the credit for can also be accredited to Amanda and the rest of my family. Amanda has a career off the farm right now as a research scientist, which provides off-farm income and benefits to support our family. She made it possible for me to focus on growing the farm, reinvesting nearly all the profits to make long-term improvements and modernize and innovate. While balancing her own career, she helps on the farm when she can, and has greatly improved our beef cattle management with her background in animal science. So one of the areas of the farm that we've kind of spearheaded and took over together was improving the beef cattle operation. We transitioned away from the traditional Herefords and Black Angus that were raised on the farm, and we now raise British White Parks, which are actually a heritage breed known for their hardiness, strong maternal instincts, and high-quality beef. To enhance herd management, we also invested in a squeeze chute and corral system, which the squeeze chute is the thing on the right here, which allows us to safely handle the cattle and maintain their health more effectively and easily. We also reintroduced a breeding program to the farm. For the previous 10 years or so, we were mainly buying in feeder calves and finishing them on the farm. In 2023, so again, a pretty recent history, we did a store addition. This project was again a grant I applied for and helped partially fund the project. The grant was through the Connecticut Department of Agriculture. And the goal of this expansion was to really build on the momentum gained during COVID and becoming a one-stop shop and year-round farm market. And overall, the goal was to make it easier for customers to get everything they need while continuing to support local agriculture. So my view on these changes and expansion basically is while people want to support local farms, the days of the rickety old farm stand really aren't what they used to be. Customers want to and will support local, but they don't want to make an extra stop to do it. So we expanded the store and continue to offer more products so that they don't have to make that special trip to the grocery store for, say, a lemon, just because it isn't grown in Connecticut. At the peak of our season, we've employed up to 14 people at a time. With now being year-round operation, we're able to keep several people during the winter months as well. So while we are a family farm, it would not be possible to be where we are without a great team of employees as well. Some other recent infrastructure improvements. We installed a solar array on the equipment pole barn to offset electric usage for farm operations. Installed heat pumps on the farm store for efficient electric cooling and heating. And both of these projects were also partially funded through grants that I applied for. 2024, another big event was my older brother Carl and his wife Sarah were married on the farm. And Sarah actually started her time on the farm as one of our farm store workers. Another big event for 2024 was Amanda and I welcomed our daughter Charlotte and Demander. As the first member of the 9th generation to grow up on the farm, Charlotte represents the next chapter. However, we believe continuing the farm should be a choice, not an obligation. The next generation has to truly want to carry on the farm's legacy and not be pressured into it. They must be willing to embrace the lifestyle that comes with it, the good and the bad. Just this morning, actually, we had a cow who had been having a difficult late pregnancy. We've been doing everything we can for her over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And she went into labor preterm this morning and was having trouble. Amanda and I started to assist her, and later Dr. Shannon, who's actually here, came to help. But unfortunately, the calf was already dead once we got it out. So, an example of not an easy day in this life. So, overall, it's not an easy lifestyle, but perhaps it's a noble one. Thank you. The mom cow is, we're not out of the woods yet, but we're hopeful. Yeah, luckily, it wasn't worse than losing just the calf so far. So, I guess if there's time or interest in questions or comments, we could go there, yeah.
I hear you're going to have strawberries this year.
Yeah, so strawberries are the most recent addition to the crops that we're growing. We're giving it a try. You don't count your chickens before they're hatched, but so far they look good. They went into the winter good, and we'll see what happens. Hopefully we have enough to sell, and then possibly do U-pick as well. Yeah.
I know that we have seasonal. Last summer we had drought, especially towards the end. How do you diversify for different types of weather? Sometimes you grow tomatoes, sometimes.
Yep. So that's kind of the advantage of being a diversified farm. It's kind of like, think of it like a diversified stock portfolio. You don't put everything into one stock. So in years that, there's drought, some things will do well, some things won't. There's years where we've had drought, but we can irrigate our tomatoes, and the tomatoes don't get sick till October because it's been nice and dry. Or in a super wet year, pastures are super lush, and we have a great hay crop. So you kind of diversify to do the best you can against the weather, but again, it's farming, and a lot of things are out of your control. Any other questions? questions, comments?
I think you did a great job.
Thank you. I guess if there's no other questions or comments, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.